Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If all has gone to plan, you should be seeing this video on March 1st, which is the beginning of Women's History Month, and in light of that fact, today's video is going to be a list of 6 books that I think would be great to pick up if you want to celebrate this month by reading something. This year's theme is Moving Forward Together, which is really focused on women involved in education and mentorship, so I wanted to lean into that a little bit with the books that I chose, and I've ended up with a list of 6 books, 2 of which are nonfictions that I feel like I learned a lot from, 2 of which are written by academics, and I think you really get a feel for their passion for their subjects in their writing, and the last 2 are a little bit less related to the theme, but they're both about women pushing boundaries that have been imposed upon them by society, which I think is just a relevant topic year-round. So starting with those 2 nonfiction books, I want to first mention The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I just finished this book recently and I thought it was incredible. I gave it 5 stars. It was my first 5-star of the year. This is a book where she's examining the plant, the serviceberry, which has a variety of names from different regions, but it's really important for indigenous food systems. And she's looking at the plant as an example of a sort of gift economy because of its mutual relationships with other plants and other creatures in its environment, and the way that that can model a gift economy that might be resistive to capitalism. So it's really about gift economies, it's about the natural world and the lessons that we can draw from it. And it's a book that sits very much at the intersection of ecology, economy, and anthropology, and I thought it was just fascinating. She really digs into like different economies and how they're structured and the different kind of behaviors that they incentivize, and the ways that a gift economy, while typically small in scale, because it wasn't ever designed to be like on a global scale, the way that like individual and community level gift economies can provide a form of resistance for people and give us opportunities to build community and resilience to oppression, which I just think is so interesting. It was a really interesting concept, and she does a really great job of making difficult, big ideas really accessible. So I absolutely loved this, and I definitely want to pick up her other book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I think she has a 3rd one as well, but I can't think of the title of it. But I've heard so many good things about Braiding Sweetgrass, and now having read The Serviceberry, I definitely need to pick that one up as well. The second nonfiction I want to mention is called A Map to the Door of No Return by Dionne Brand, and this is a book that has so much going on in it that I find that I've struggled to describe it. So this is one instance where I want to read you the description on Goodreads because I think it does a really great job of explaining kind of the central concept of the book. So this says, A Map to the Door of No Return is a timely book that explores the relevance and nature of identity and belonging in a culturally diverse and rapidly changing world. It is an insightful, sensitive, and poetic book of discovery. The title, A Map to the Door of No Return, refers to both a place in imagination and a point in history, the Middle Passage. The quest for identity and place has profound meaning and resonance in an age of heterogeneous identities. I just think it was such an interesting book, and again, it's hard to talk about because there's so much going on there, but what I found really interesting about Brand's writing is, one, it's very poetic, as that description says. I think she does, similar to Robin Wall Kimmerer, she does a great job of kind of drawing you in with the flow of her writing. It's just really engaging and really easy to keep reading, and she also makes those kind of big ideas more accessible, but I think Brand is also doing something that leans a little more towards the artistic, and so I feel like there's so many like layers of meaning in every sentence that she's written that I really want to go back and reread this book and get more out of it because I think there is so much more I could learn from it. The other thing I really like about this is that Brand's story and her examination of identity is really not focused at the US at all, and so for me as an American that was unusual to get a chance to read something from somebody who is not an American writer talking about the Middle Passage and talking about the Black diaspora, because so many of the texts that we're introduced to in the US tend to be very US centered. So Brand is really focusing on Africa, the Caribbean, and Canada, which I found really engaging, and I enjoyed getting that kind of counterpoint to all of the narratives we get about specifically like Black diaspora and the like kind of lasting history of slavery in the US. So I feel like it's a really great counterpoint if you're wanting to broaden your understanding of those topics. Moving on to our fiction books, the first of the kind of academically minded ones I want to mention is The Teixclon Duology by Arkady Martine. This is a series I mention a lot. I love them so much. But Arkady Martine is, by training, a Byzantine historian, and she also, I think, works now as like an urban planner or a city planner of some variety. I can't remember exactly what her like role is now, but I think you get both of those things, kind of the Byzantine history and the kind of urban planning, in her writing in this series. That is so much a part of the descriptions of the empire and its colonies and the other places that it hasn't not yet colonized and the differences between them, and it just really shines through. There's also this very like historical feeling to parts of it, like some of the naming systems, but all of it is also so like futuristic and sci-fi. It's just such an interesting blend of things, but you really get a sense of Arkady Martine's interest in those topics and the value that she finds in both history and like city planning. So I just really enjoy the ways that those elements crop up across the story when we're following somebody who's an ambassador who is kind of traveling to a new place and seeing like the different ways that the people in the empire do things compared to the station that she's from, and the ways that like they value knowledge differently. It's just a really interesting series. You're following Mahit. It's a murder mystery kind of at its core in the first book, and it broadens from there in the second book. But we're initially following Mahit, who becomes the ambassador to the Taix-Kalani Empire, and she's arriving there. She has this kind of lasting interest in their culture, and then arrives and finds that her predecessor has been murdered, and she needs to figure out who killed him while trying not to get killed herself. And it's just a really complex story from there. Like, that's the beginning point, but it goes in so many other directions. It's also about technology. It's about, like, preservation of knowledge. And I think you just really get that kind of academic flavor in it, but it's so fun at the same time. I know a lot of people I've seen that have reviewed this have said it's very dense. I would argue it's more poetic, and the writing really worked for me personally, but I definitely think it's a strong flavor, so your mileage may vary with that one. The other one I want to mention is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which, hang on a second, it's the only one I currently have access to, in physical copy, so bear with me. Forgot to grab it before I started filming, but I actually am currently rereading this one for my Works Book Club. We are meeting kind of early to mid-March to talk about this, and it's been a while since I've read it. But Yellowface is following this woman who steals a manuscript from her friend who has just died in front of her and publishes it as her own in a sort of ethnically ambiguous way, because the book itself is about Chinese laborers during, I think it's World War I, and the chaos that follows as June tries to justify her decisions to herself and to her audience, which is the reader. It's very much like addressed to the reader. I really enjoyed this the first time around, and I'm enjoying my reread of it. I think there's so many layers to what's happening here. There's June's kind of white privilege that she's not really acknowledging at any point, that she, in a way, is very privileged, but sees herself as being less privileged because she thinks that the publishing industry values diverse voices more so than white voices, which we know statistically is not true. It's also looking at like her engagement and relationship to social media and her kind of need for attention. And I think this one's really interesting because June is not, I would say, a likable woman, but I think she's somebody that we can all learn from. And on top of that, you really get the sense that R.F. Kuang is the academic that she is. There's this need to like dig in and investigate that I feel like really comes with like the process of doing research. But you get that she really deeply understands the publishing industry, having worked in it for a while now, obviously as a writer. This is her, fifth book? So she is very familiar with the way the publishing industry works, and you also can get the sense that there's like all these other topics that she's researched around it, because this one also deals a lot with like Chinese geopolitics and history. I think it's a hard one to read because June is so unlikable, and there's so many times where I personally get secondhand embarrassment from her, because I'm like, I'm embarrassed for you, that this thing you're doing is incredibly stupid and bad, and I'm embarrassed on your behalf. But I think that, especially for white readers, she's somebody that we recognize, and you can even recognize her in yourself, and it's really important to grapple with that. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think the portrayal is really interesting, and you really get a sense of R.F. Kuang's like passion for publishing industry and for like the topics that she's discussing elsewhere and the kind of research that she's done for this novel. The last two books I want to mention are more kind of slightly unhinged women's stories, and we'll start with the less unhinged one and move towards more unhinged. But I want to mention Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which has been widely recommended. I know I picked it up because I had seen so many recommendations for it, but I think it's such a weird and interesting book, and even having seen a lot of recommendations for it, I really didn't know what to expect going into it. But in this, we're following a young woman who's working at a convenience store, and it's about her trying to grapple with the expectations placed on her as a woman in society, and specifically in Japanese society in kind of the modern era, where there's all these expectations that she should be looking for a husband looking to have children, looking to start a career. There's all of these different expectations, and she's just like, but I'm happy. I like working at the convenience store. It's, you know, orderly, and it gives me something to do during the day, but it's not anything bigger than that, and that's all I want for myself. And so it's about her kind of like trying to find a balance between those expectations and doing what she wants with her life, like not allowing others to dictate to her how she should live her life. She also has some weird interactions with this man who's kind of incel-y, and it's very weird because I think that our main character is not particularly likable either. She's kind of unpleasant as a person, at least being in her head is fairly unpleasant, but at the same time, she makes a lot of good points about like, why should I have to live the way that others think I should have to live? So I think it's a really interesting book, and it really challenges you because of that unlikableness of the character, that it's someone who is having all of these unpleasant experiences but is also herself unpleasant to other people. So I feel like it challenges you to really think about also like the way that we treat people, and it's not just like feeling for a likable character who is being mistreated by the people around her, but finding the humanity in somebody you don't like and understanding where they're coming from and thinking through their points from their perspective. So I really enjoyed this one more than I thought. This was one I sat down and devoured in like a single afternoon. I bought it, got home, did not leave from my reading chair for several hours because I just needed to know what was going to happen, and I needed to know how things were going to play out for this character. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I know it's been recommended a lot, but I still like want more people to read it because it's just interesting. The last one I have to mention here is an ARC that I read recently. I believe the book's just come out as well. This is Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fato. And this one is far more unhinged, but in a similar vein to Convenience Store Woman, we're following a kind of unlikable female protagonist who is pushing back on the boundaries that society has placed on her. And she's also like really insightfully dissecting society in this like almost outsider view, where she's in this weird space. She's living as a governess. She's just joined this family on their estate as their governess, and she's in this interesting position where she's not technically a servant, but she's also not a member of the nobility. So she's in this spot where she can both critique the nobility and the servants of this household. She's kind of viewing all of them and dissecting their behaviors and really talking about like the reasons they do what they do, and in a pretty vicious way, I would say. There's also lots of gore in this one, so just a heads up on that if you decide to pick this one up. This one does have a lot of gore. There's also some child murder in it, so just be aware of those things before you pick it up in case that's not something that you want to read. But I found this one really engaging, and I think the thing that I liked most about it was the way that our main character, whose name is escaping me at this moment, Winifred Naughty, that's her name. So the way that Winifred really is like constantly observing the people around her and looking at like, oh, well, Mrs. Pounds does this thing because she's a woman living in these conditions in this society. And so like I understand it, but also I'm kind of critiquing and judging her for it. It's really an interesting way of like looking at those societal pressures, and the way that Winifred kind of throws them out the window and goes, I'm gonna do what I want. And so she just behaves very strangely. But at the same time, it's weird because everybody in the book is slightly weird, so very strange things are constantly happening, which I think is what allows Winifred to like make those observations, because she's noting them but treating them as normal, and everybody else is treating them as normal. So it really puts the reader in the position of that viewer who's going, hey, wait a second, that's kind of fucked up. So I feel like it's a book that's positioning you in a very interesting way as a reader, and I think that Winifred is both engaging and fun to follow and very unlikable in a really fun way. It's hard to recommend just because it's so gory, but like I had a lot of fun reading it. It's really interesting, and I'm hopeful that we'll see more reviews for it in the coming months because it's just come out in the last few weeks, and I think people haven't quite got a chance to read it yet. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what other people are saying about this book once it's been out for a little while. So those are my 6 recommendations for you. I really hope you found something in this list that you might want to pick up. These are all books that I personally really enjoyed to varying degrees. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments below what other books you might want to pick up for Women's History Month, or other books that you think I should pick up for Women's History Month, things that maybe are not on my radar. Would love to have some more recommendations, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.